Something just shifted in Western Canada, and if you've been watching the tension between the provinces and Ottawa, you know this didn't come out of nowhere. But the tone, the timing, the escalation. That's what has people across the country doing a double take. Because what started as political frustration has now evolved into something far more serious, a renewed, louder, and more coordinated conversation about Western Canada potentially breaking away and exploring closer alignment with the United States. And whether you believe this is political theater or the early stages of a historic realignment, one thing is clear: the pressure on Ottawa just intensified. Open with high-contrast visuals of Alberta's oil fields at sunrise, dark skies breaking into sharp light. Cut to slow-motion footage of provincial flags waving in the wind. Overlay bold text, 51st State. Then transition to clips of Parliament Hill in shadow, contrasting warm western tones with cooler, muted visuals of Ottawa. The symbolism matters here: distance, division, different priorities. In recent weeks, political rhetoric from leaders in provinces like Alberta and Saskatchewan has sharpened noticeably. What was once framed as greater autonomy is now being discussed in language that hints at structural change. Provincial officials have publicly questioned federal authority over natural resources, equalization payments, and environmental regulations. B-roll here should include press conferences, legislative chambers, and maps highlighting Western Canada in bold color while the rest of the country fades slightly into grayscale. At the heart of this movement is long-standing frustration. Western provinces contribute heavily to Canada's energy output, particularly oil and gas, yet many residents feel policy decisions from Ottawa restrict development and economic growth. Cut to high-contrast footage of oil rigs silhouetted against dramatic skies, pipelines stretching across open land, and workers in hard hats. Overlay graphics showing energy exports flowing south toward the United States. The visual message is powerful: economic gravity pulling in a different direction. Now, let's be clear, there has been no formal, legally binding declaration of statehood. But what's new is the coordination and seriousness of the rhetoric. Public town halls have drawn larger crowds. Online petitions advocating for sovereignty have seen surges in signatures. Some provincial lawmakers have floated the idea of referendums to measure public support for expanded autonomy, or in more extreme discussions, outright separation. Use B-roll of packed community halls, people holding signs, microphones being passed around. Show faces, concerned, determined, divided. The relationship between Western Canada and the federal government has always been complicated. Equalization payments, carbon pricing policies, and pipeline approvals have created recurring flashpoints. When Ottawa delays or blocks major energy infrastructure, provincial leaders argue that it directly impacts jobs and local economies. Overlay archival footage of pipeline debates and federal announcements. Use lighting shifts to emphasize tension: brighter, warmer tones during Western speeches, cooler, sharper tones when showing federal responses. Cut briefly to clips of the Prime Minister speaking at a podium in Ottawa, maintaining composure while fielding questions about national unity. The contrast between calm federal messaging and rising provincial intensity creates dramatic tension. Add subtle background music that builds but doesn't overwhelm: steady, deliberate, serious. Maps play a crucial storytelling role here. Display a high-contrast animated map highlighting Western provinces and their trade routes with the United States. Show arrows representing energy exports and economic ties flowing south. The visual suggests why some voices argue that alignment with the U.S. economy feels natural, at least from a trade perspective. But also overlay text reminding viewers, constitutional change in Canada is complex and requires significant national consensus. Here's where you engage the audience directly. Look straight into the camera. Slow down slightly. Ask, if a referendum were held tomorrow in Alberta or Saskatchewan, how do you think it would turn out? Would economic frustration outweigh national unity? Or is this movement more symbolic than practical? Invite viewers to comment below, especially those living in Western provinces. Their perspective matters. Back to the narrative. Economically, the implications are massive. Any serious move towards separation or statehood would impact trade agreements, currency systems, federal debt distribution, defense structures, and Indigenous treaties. Show quick B-roll flashes of border crossings, Canadian and American flags side by side, stock market tickers, and military personnel in training exercises. Each visual reinforces how interconnected these systems are. Politically, This moment tests federal-provincial balance. Ottawa must decide whether to dismiss the rhetoric as fringe pressure or address the grievances more directly. Provincial leaders must calculate whether escalating language strengthens their negotiating power or risks destabilizing investor confidence. Overlay stock footage of financial districts, construction sites, and small businesses opening their doors at dawn. Public reaction has been mixed. Some Western Canadians see this as a necessary wake-up call. Others worry that talk of statehood oversimplifies deeply complex legal and cultural realities. Cut-to-street interviews, social media screenshots, blur usernames, and diverse community reactions. Keep the lighting bold and cinematic, but let the faces tell the story. As we reach the midpoint of this unfolding situation, one thing becomes undeniable: the conversation has shifted from quiet dissatisfaction to open confrontation. Whether this leads to constitutional reform, increased autonomy, or simply a recalibration of federal relations remains uncertain. But ignoring it is no longer an option. Now let's move past the headlines and dramatic rhetoric and examine what this would actually mean in practical terms. Because while the phrase, 51st state, makes for explosive political theater, transforming a Canadian province into a U.S. state is not a simple declaration. It would require a chain reaction of legal, constitutional, economic, and diplomatic steps unlike anything modern Canada has experienced. Visually, shift the tone here. Bring in sharper lighting, slower pacing, and bold on-screen text that reads, "What would it take?" Fade in a high-contrast image of the Canadian Constitution, then transition to the U.S. Capitol. The message is clear: two systems, two frameworks, and a mountain of legal complexity in between. Under Canada's Constitution, provinces cannot unilaterally declare independence and automatically exit the Federation. Any serious move towards separation would likely require a provincial referendum, negotiations with the federal government, and potentially a constitutional amendment supported by multiple provinces. Even then, separation negotiations would involve dividing federal assets, debt obligations, military responsibilities, trade treaties, and Indigenous agreements. Insert animated graphics showing federal debt pie charts and arrows splitting responsibilities. This is where viewers begin to understand the stakes are enormous. And that's just the Canadian side. For Western Canada, whether it's Alberta, Saskatchewan, or a coalition of provinces, to become part of the United States, Congress would need to approve admission. That means political will in Washington. Show B-roll of the U.S. Capitol floor, congressional votes, and American flags under bright, dramatic lighting. Admission of a new state is not automatic, it is deeply political, and it would shift the balance of power in Congress. That alone would spark intense debate south of the border. Economically, the ripple effects would be immediate. Western provinces are deeply integrated into Canada's fiscal structure. Equalization payments, federal transfers, and shared infrastructure funding create a web of financial interdependence. Overlay graphics showing tax flows between provinces and Ottawa. A departure would require renegotiating trade agreements under frameworks like the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. Markets would react quickly: currency volatility, investment hesitation, credit rating reviews. Cut to stock market tickers flashing, financial analysts watching screens, and oil prices updating in real time. Energy would be at the center of it all. Alberta's oil sands and Saskatchewan's resource sector are key pillars of Canada's export economy. A statehood scenario could potentially reduce regulatory friction with U.S. markets, but it could also create border complexities, tariff adjustments, and environmental policy conflicts. Show oil pipelines glowing under twilight skies, then contrast that with images of border checkpoints and customs inspections. Opportunity and obstacle, side by side. Now pause and address the viewer directly. Ask them, if Western Canada aligned more closely with the United States economically, would that strengthen the region or weaken Canada as a whole? Do you see this as leverage to push Ottawa into compromise or a genuine long-term strategy? Encourage thoughtful discussion in the comments, especially from viewers in Western provinces and those in Eastern Canada who might see this differently. Back to the broader picture. Public opinion is the real variable here. Polling historically shows that while frustration runs high in certain regions, support for full separation fluctuates. Dramatic headlines generate attention, but sustained political change requires consistent majority backing. Use B-roll of town halls, campaign rallies, and diverse communities, Indigenous leaders, small business owners, students, all of whom would be directly impacted by any structural shift. Ottawa's response will likely focus on stability and unity. Federal leaders understand that markets, international partners, and everyday Canadians need reassurance. Expect language emphasizing national strength, shared history, and economic resilience. Cut to Parliament Hill at dusk, lights glowing against the night sky. It's a visual reminder of continuity. But Western leaders may see strategic value in escalating rhetoric. Sometimes, strong positioning at the provincial level isn't about immediate separation, it's about negotiating power. By raising the stakes publicly, provinces can pressure Ottawa to revisit fiscal arrangements, regulatory frameworks, or energy approvals. Overlay text reading, leverage or lifeline. The question itself drives engagement. Here's the deeper implication. Even if statehood never materializes, the conversation alone signals a shifting political landscape. It reflects widening regional divides, economic anxieties, and evolving identity debates within Canada. And once these conversations enter mainstream political discourse, they rarely disappear entirely. Bring the visuals to a powerful close. Show a split-screen image, Western Canada's wide-open landscapes on one side, Parliament Hill on the other. Gradually blend the images together. The symbolism reinforces the central theme: tension, interconnection, uncertainty. End with a confident, steady tone. This isn't just about whether Western Canada becomes a U.S. state. It's about federal balance, economic direction, and the future identity of the country. The next moves from provincial leaders in Ottawa will shape not just headlines, but long-term policy and national cohesion. If you found this breakdown valuable, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into Canadian political and economic shifts. And again, share your perspective below. Is this a historic turning point, or a high-stakes negotiation tactic playing out in public view? The conversation is just getting started.